Last summer, a fan, or someone who has been charitably described as such, approached George R. Martin, author of the book series A Song of Ice and Fire, the inspiration for series such as Game of Thrones, Fire and Blood, and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, and asked whether he would hand his most well-read series off to author Brandon Sanderson when he passed away soon. Naturally, the crass nature of the inquiry was broadly held as cause for both question and questioner to be ignored and brushed off derisively. I felt the same way, and I didn't bother making a video until an article circulated claiming that the idea of a Sanderson takeover could be a good thing. I disagreed. In that other video, link in the description, I had a few points, among them being that Sanderson himself had explained why he refused, and that I agreed with Sanderson's argument that he would be a poor fit, extending his reasoning to why I felt I disliked what I had read of his work. Quite a few people who saw that video disagreed with those comments, but I stand by them. In fact, I stand by basically the entire video. One of my points, which I contested most with some of the comments, was that I felt Martin neither owed a further book in the series to his readers, nor was it a healthy mindset to resent him for not delivering one. Martin gave an interview this year, actually, in the Big 2026, with James Hibberd of The Hollywood Reporter back in January. It was published just when A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms was debuting, so there was a lot of renewed buzz around the A Song of Ice and Fire universe. I'm hardly a current events channel, so it might seem a little odd for me to be covering a news article, but to my surprise, it was quite relevant to the sentiment of my original video. The first hint of this was in an early passage. Season 1 is faithful to Martin's debut Dunk and Egg Tale, The Hedge Knight, and Season 2, which has already been greenlit, will be based on his novella The Sworn Sword. There is, however, one potential problem for the show's future. The big issue is that I have only written 3 novellas, and I have a lot more stories about Dunk and Egg in my fucking head, Martin says, looking a bit shamefaced. I've got to get them down on paper. I began writing 2 at various points in the past year. One is set in Winterfell and one set in the Riverlands. Oh, George, I say, not again. I think we all know that feeling. A while back, quite a long time ago on the scale of my life, less so on the scale of a writer who has lived for more than twice as long, I let go of the idea that Martin was going to deliver a new Ice and Fire book soon. I decided that I felt that way because I wanted the real thing. I wanted the real A Song of Ice and Fire. I saw what happened to the HBO series adaptation when it ran out of books to adapt. I made a video about that years ago, but here I'll only say that people seem to put this down to bad writing and leave it there. I think that's mostly lazy analysis. The 5th season of Game of Thrones is lesser than what came before, but still serviceable. The 6th's a bit less and less. Into seasons 7 and 8, something curious starts to become apparent. The showrunners stopped caring. They wanted to move on to other projects. Martin has said as much himself. Having the goose that lays the golden eggs and then cooking it for a quick meal is pretty disgraceful in my opinion. Not only does it leave potential on the table, it's clearly not one person struggling to do a job right, but rather 2 people choosing to do a job badly rather than take their time. Yes, the writing is bad, but it's bad because it's rushed, and it's rushed because it's apathetic. I think people can say what they like about Martin, but I would never call him apathetic. Writing is his life. In fact, this interview makes it clear how intent Martin is on the HBO adaptations being done his way. I can't say that's a totally unsympathetic attitude for the original work's author to have. He's invested in the adaptations in a way that no one else truly can be. There's some respect for this on display. For example, regarding A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, Hibberd discloses the following. Martin has made something else consistently clear. He believes book adaptations, not just his own, should be as faithful as possible. Martin is childless and has said he considers his characters to be his children. If another writer wants to make a major change to one of his brood, or remove one from a story altogether, he wants to know why, and the reason should make sense. Knight showrunner Parker says he suspects Martin leaning on HBO and showrunners to respect his vision is one reason why these shows have done so well, and that the author has been nothing but a benefit. However, this comes with something of an asterisk. While Game of Thrones may be over and a knight of the Seven Kingdoms may have a positive relationship with Martin, the same cannot be said for House of the Dragon. Some of this has basically been public knowledge for some time. This isn't a total bombshell, but it's telling how extensively the situation appears to have deteriorated. For example, Hibbard says this: "I asked Martin carefully, I know you can't say much about this, but I was wondering how your relationship with Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal got so rocky." "It's worse than rocky," Martin says, looking miserable. "It's abysmal." Without getting into spoilers, Martin's gripes about Dragon stem from disputes over changes to the book's characters that impact key plot points. "I hired Ryan," Martin says. "I thought Ryan and I were partners, and we were all through the first season. I would read early drafts of the scripts, I would give notes, he would change some things. It was working really well, I thought." When Ryan came to loggerheads with the original Dragon co-showrunner, Miguel Sapochnik, Ryan asked for Martin's support in their dispute and got it. Sapochnik left the show after season 1. Then we got into season 2, and he basically stopped listening to me, Martin says. "I would give notes, and nothing would happen. Sometimes he would explain why he wasn't doing it, other times he would tell me, 'Oh, okay, yeah, I'll think about that.' It got worse and worse, and I began to get more and more annoyed. Finally, it got to a point where I was told by HBO that I should submit all my notes to them, and they would give Ryan our combined notes." One night in 2024, while the second season was airing, Martin wrote a blog post, "Beware the Butterflies," which publicly revealed some of his gripes. When he woke the next morning, it was as if Martin had unleashed his own red wedding. An upset HBO exec had called Martin's manager, who phoned Martin's assistant, who took down the post. But not before entertainment sites, including THR, picked up Martin's comments. "I would have put it back up, but then I would have looked like an idiot," he says. And 80% of it was praise, but that's not what people focused on. Still, the post was meant to be just part 1 of 6 detailing the author's issues with Dragon. Martin says he can't say anything beyond this. But sources say Martin and Condal's relationship deteriorated further and came to a head during a Zoom call with the show's producers and some HBO executives. The purpose of the call was for Condal to present his vision for Season 3. After Condal spoke, Martin detailed his many objections and allegedly declared, "This is not my story any longer." Condal didn't comment for this profile but pointed to a statement he gave to Entertainment Weekly last year. "I made every effort to include George in the adaptation process. I really did. But at some point he just became unwilling to acknowledge the practical issues at hand in a reasonable way. I just have to keep marching forward for the sake of the crew, the cast, and for HBO because that's my job. I can only hope that George and I can rediscover that harmony someday." After their contentious Zoom call, HBO asked Martin to step back from Dragon altogether. A few months later, the author was brought back aboard. "I can't talk about it," Martin says. "George and Ryan had a disagreement on the direction of Season 3, an HBO insider says. At that point, it was clear that the process and communication with them was broken and needed a reset. So there was naturally a period where everyone took a step back for a while until we could figure out a new way forward." This has all been at the front of my mind of late as I've been exploring the idea of discussing adaptations again on this channel for the however manyth time we're on now, probably with reference to the Netflix Witcher series, and rereading some of A Song of Ice and Fire on the side when I have time. The history of adaptations of Martin's work has been much on my mind in this atmosphere, and a lot of fans have continued dealing in the material we have gotten and the adaptations of that material. A Song of Ice and Fire is a big world that matters to a lot of people, including Martin himself. It's characteristic of a writer in Martin's position to be somewhat prickly. I don't know what it's like to be that successful, but I do know what it's like to be a writer and a creative, and I understand his more serious position. As such, I don't find it surprising that he would bump heads with showrunners adapting his work. In fact, I think given how things have gone in the past, it's basically required of him. We can only speculate exactly what it was about House of the Dragon that led Martin to feel so betrayed by the show's direction for its 3rd season specifically, but not only do I think he really cares about the show's direction, I also think the series has benefited quite a bit from the court intrigue aspect of his writing that made the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones, even some of the odd middle seasons, glimmer and glow. The nuances in the character perspectives and mysterious plots of A Song of Ice and Fire are what make the series so good. Based on the blog post referenced in the interview, the blood and cheese sequence from House of the Dragon, if you know, you know, is at the center of the so-called butterfly effect of changes, hence beware the butterflies. I say this because of the hinting Martin has done in the past, especially around a specific character death that he thinks will go poorly after the change. I know Martin, like most sensible writers, isn't against changes for the sake of being against changes, but he does rightfully feel that if there are to be changes, then they should be done with good reason and nothing less will do. In fact, when I first posted about how Martin does not owe in scare quotes, us fans another book, this was a part of what I meant. I want Martin's work. I want the real thing. As far as I know, he's the only one who can write it, and only on his time. If it takes 10 years or 20, then that's how long it takes. If it can't happen, then that's sad, and I'm not happy about it, but imagine if he put out something half-baked. I wouldn't be happy. I like his work, and I like the way he does it. This gets us back to the point we discussed previously. Hibbard's article has a good summary of the Q&A panel incident from last year. The WorldCon panel was taking audience questions when somebody asked Martin if he would let another writer finish The Winds of Winter because, quote, "you're not going to be around for much longer." The audience booed. Martin felt like he'd been slapped. When he looked online to see the reaction, he was dismayed to find some fans saying he deserved it. They say he lied to us, he is going to die soon. Look how old he is, Martin says. Even now, months later, the author looks rattled. I really didn't need that shit, he says. Nobody needs that shit. I think the thing that strikes me about the comments I received when talking about this altercation previously is that a number of people seemed to be reveling in it. Martin is right that a number of people talk about him like he's a deceiver, and seemed to think he deserved that treatment. The tough thing about all the work he's been doing these past 10 years or so is that the stuff that's been produced has largely been what people would consider collaborations or side projects. From a certain angle, it might look like he's slacking off. I don't really think that's true. He's clearly written a lot and thrown out a lot he wasn't happy with, where Winds of Winter is concerned. And I've liked what he's worked on in the meantime, like the lore of Elden Ring, for instance, one of my favorite video games of all time. He's done all that while chipping away at Winds of Winter and watching several of his friends pass away. It seems to me that a lot of the cruelty people display towards Martin isn't understandable frustration at possibly never seeing how the story truly ends, which I feel, and a lot of fans have felt, but rather a lingering resentment that they've nursed into a grudge. It's something small, but I often find that the people who are the most cruel are the ones who are the most insecure in their negative emotions. I'm not happy about this situation either, but it smacks of an obsessive need to over-justify that feeling when someone inflates that sentiment, as if they were defending themselves in advance, to say, oh, he deserves that terrible treatment, he's done this and that, it's actually justifiable, and whatnot. That's not a cutting truth, it's a defensive, animalistic dominance display. I get that we're all upset, but I think we have to be adults about this thing. One thing about Winds of Winter that I should note is that it's maybe going to be 1.5 times the length of a number of other books. Martin split the previous book into 2, one of which turned out to be arguably my favorite book in the series, and that was also because it was simply too long. What might have, until recently, been a 5-book series has become a 7-book series. I actually doubt it will stay that way. With the pacing of the first 3 books, if you had told me there would only be 5, I would be skeptical. Conflicts in these books unfold very slowly and deliberately, so the ending would have needed to be rushed. I still think it might feel rushed, unless the final 2 books are double the length of the first one. I really think aiming for 8 or 9 books might be more reasonably paced, and I think that puts this all into perspective, doesn't it? This was always going to be a Herculean task, and the finished end product would be something amazing to witness. As things are, I think we've already seen something amazing, and everything new Martin does really makes me happy to experience it as a fan because I know he's bringing his talent to what he's making. I meant it when I said that I am also not happy about the situation Winds of Winter is in. I don't want to overstate or understate that fact. Martin seems to feel similarly. He's not terribly happy about the prospect of not finishing. The interview makes a note of this. I ask Martin if he's ever considered simply giving up on the book. It's your life, George, I say. You don't have to spend it working on something if you find it torturous. I would hate that, Martin says. It would feel like a total failure to me. I want to finish. Again, I can't exactly relate to Martin's situation, but I do relate to the emotions of having a creative project that you hate to leave undone. It's the curse of creative writers, maybe, to feel like we're along for the ride in our own stories. The writer is sometimes called the god of their created world, and maybe that's true, but if it is, there's some kind of twisted Leibnizian sort of god forming the best of all possible worlds out of an imperceptibly complex series of theoretical limitations and logical constraints. As far as I can tell, being a good writer is mostly inspiration, practice, and hygiene. You need to read and try to understand the types of things you want to write, you need to keep practicing to get better and better, and you need to keep a routine of some sort to actually do the writing. I don't have much reason to think Martin isn't doing his best at that, so I don't think there's much I can do but be supportive and hope, understanding that I might be let down. I hope that makes sense. Saying something like that aloud might not be cathartic. It might not be the thing people hear me say that gives them permission to say something cruel and feed their worst impulses, but it's what I genuinely feel, and I think anything more crass than that is basically unjustifiable. I want The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Summer to happen. I want them to happen as soon as possible. I want them to be everything we've ever imagined, so I can take the bad taste of the show's ending out of my mouth. But I don't want them to be anything less than Martin's best work, and I don't think there's any two ways about that. It's going to be the long game for us. But I signed up to read a series of books, each with 1,000 pages, so I'm not really surprised. This latest interview has me feeling vindicated in my sentiment about Martin's work and his process. I'd like to know what you all think, provided people can be marginally normal about this topic, or at least no more abnormal than we usually are anyway. Thanks so much to my supporters over on Patreon, my channel members, and to the backbone of this channel, viewers like you. Take care.